Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Collins, UBA's Director of Strategic Solutions. On behalf of United Benefit Advisors and Bernie Portal, I welcome you to today's presentation in the UBA Employee Benefit webinar series. Today's topic is Payroll versus Ben Admin Landscape in 2023. Who can you trust? Our speaker today is Sarah Weinstein. Sarah leads the sales team, which is responsible for creating awareness and demand for Bernie Portal's products and services. Sarah received her BS in advertising from Middle Tennessee State University and obtained her MBA from Lipscomb University College of Business. She has multiple marketing certification and has earned her PHR certification. Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. Excited to be with you all today. Like Lisa mentioned, I'm going to talk about payroll versus an admin landscape. Who can you trust? We were just talking right before this webinar, and you all got on just about how many changes there has been just in the last 6 months in this landscape. So there's a lot to be talked about, and I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So a quick look at the agenda. I'm going to start with an introduction to the payroll landscape. Then I'm going to talk about the benefit administration landscape and a lot of the changes that have happened in the last 6 months or so. Then I'm going to talk about the options that employers have, really a two-system approach or multi-system approach when it comes to HR systems, or a one-system approach. So we'll talk through kind of the pros and cons of those, and where it might make sense for an organization to have one approach over the other. All right. I'm going to start with payroll, an introduction to that landscape. I think it's really important when we think about payroll to understand the history of payroll. So I'm going to start there. So believe it or not, payroll systems haven't been around forever. And employers really didn't have to worry about kind of the complexity of payroll until 1943. That's when the current Tax Payment Act required employers to withhold taxes from employees' wages. That was after the war, and essentially added a lot more complexity to an employee getting paid. In 1949, Henry Traub saw that as an opportunity. He was an accountant that actually started ADP. He witnessed one of his clients who had an illness and was out, and all the employees at the organization walked out because they did not get paid. So therefore, Henry saw an opportunity with ADP, and payroll processing was born. For the next 20 years or so, companies that had payroll processing were larger organizations, until 1971, where Paychex was founded. They actually started with only $3,000 in the bank, and really the goal of Paychex was targeting those small to medium-sized businesses. So starting in the 70s, really payroll processing didn't just have to be reserved for really large employers. In the 1990s, as software developed, so did these payroll companies. So there was a lot of changes in the infrastructure and the way payroll companies were built, the cloud, et cetera, in the 1990s into the 2000s. And now there's actually over 2,000 payroll companies in the US alone, which is crazy. So there's lots of options out there for employers. Something that I do want to highlight is it's a really fragmented industry. So especially as you compare it to kind of other software as a service. So if you think about payroll, for example, the top 3 biggest payroll providers, which are QuickBooks, ADP, and Paychex, only cover about 45% of small to medium-sized business employers. If you're going to compare that to accounting systems, for example, those top companies cover 95% of the market. So there are a ton of players in the payroll space, and a lot of, and even the major ones don't even have half of the market. So something to think about as you're thinking about payroll systems is just how many there are. And really the market share is really dispersed across a ton of different organizations. Even the leaders don't even have half the market. Something else I wanted to talk on is what payroll companies compete on. Like I mentioned, there's 2,000 payroll companies, and all of them can run your payroll. So typically, you're not going to hear a payroll company say that we run payroll really well. We're really great at withholding taxes. Those are things that payroll companies are expected to do, and they don't compete on that. Payroll companies really compete on how well payroll integrates with the other things or features at an organization. Things like benefits as it relates to benefit deductions, PTO, time, Onboarding, it's really going to depend on the organization. So for example, an organization that does a ton of hiring, for example, maybe applicant tracking tying into onboarding to tying into payroll is what's most important to them. If a company has no hourly employees, maybe PTO and time aren't important to them. So really it is those other features that they compete on, and the importance of those other features depend on the organization that's looking for payroll, what's most important to them, and then kind of lastly, how those other features tie into payroll, because payroll needs all of that information to run. Other things that they compete on, and we'll go into each of these a little bit more, is target employer size, pricing models, their benefits features, the way that it's distributed, some other things to take into account, is some of them own brokerages and PEOs. So as it comes to employee size, these are screenshots that I pulled from various payroll companies' websites. They all essentially are asking employers to self-identify as it comes to the system that they're looking at. The reason that this is a lot of payroll companies have acquired different products. So for example, their enterprise solution for 1,000 plus is probably a different product than what they're going to give you for 1 to 9 employees. Something else to keep in mind is some payroll companies have come out that only focus on the really small employers. One that comes to mind is Gusto. They, if you go to their website, have a lot of information for employers under 10. So essentially, employee size is a way to segment what product you're getting, but also the features. So for a company that's over 50, for example, they're going to want 1095C reporting, probably not available in a system that caters to under 20 employees. Something else to keep in mind is pricing. So most payroll companies are not very transparent when it comes to pricing. This is just a screenshot of one organization, but a lot of them have you fill out essentially a form, ask some information, and they're going to get back to you with a quote. A reason that is pricing is kind of all over the map, depending on the company size and the features that people want, maybe the time of year if they're trying to make quota. And pricing can really vary based on the payroll company. I've seen pricing that's per employee per month. Another common thing is per payroll run. And sometimes it's even a combination of those. There's some companies like Rippling, Gusto, ourselves, Bernie Portal, that has transparent pricing. So our pricing is just on our website if you want to check it out. Something that I think is super important when comparing payroll companies is just making sure that you're comparing apples to apples. This happens all the time, but I can think of a scenario last week when we had an organization reach out and say, wow, your pricing is actually double what I'm currently paying. We thought that was a little, unheard of or pretty competitive with pricing. So we asked for them to send over a quote. Turns out that the pricing that they were looking at was actually per payroll run. They were running payroll twice per month. So pricing actually was double what they thought it was. So there's a lot of confusion as to what people are paying for payroll. So I encourage you to look at your invoices and make sure that you understand how the billing works, especially paying attention to if it's per payroll run, if there's additional charges for running one-off payroll cycles, etc. Because if those prices are per payroll run, for example, if you're comparing that to something that's per employee per month, there's going to be some math that you need to do there, and you want to make sure that you're comparing kind of the same thing to each other. So that's something that I've seen there that's super important when you're thinking about pricing and the way that these payroll companies compete. Is just making sure that you're comparing the same things. Some payroll companies charge additional for features like PTO and time. Some of them have them bundled. So really something that I've seen people be successful with is just creating a spreadsheet of each thing and making sure that they're doing the equations if they're comparing per employee per month to a per payroll run to make sure that they're fully understanding what they're getting. Another area that payroll companies compete on is benefits, specifically having a robust benefits feature. Something to keep in mind is most payroll companies started as a payroll company, or all of them started as a payroll company. So the level of complexity to the benefits feature kind of varies based off of the payroll company. Some of them have purchased payroll or purchased benefit administration platforms and tried to piece them into their platform. So really, they're at kind of varying levels as far as how much complexity there is and robustness to their benefits features. Some are also looking to replace your broker. This is a screenshot from one website of a payroll company. So they're looking to tie in benefits with benefit administration and essentially replace the broker. Here at Bernie Portal, we believe that brokers are really important in providing strategic advice that is local and specific to an employer. So it is important to note that some of these payroll companies are competing with your broker, but you're not going to get that same experience as far as local expertise. If you're, a small employer in Florida who's relying on a company in California to advise you on benefits. The other option, as far as things that people compete on when it comes to payroll companies, are the distribution models. So there's kind of three major ones we see. Sales forces. So really large payroll companies typically have a really large sales force. Those sales forces are driving around to different employers, typically dropping off gifts. They've got a large sales force, and the way that they get kind of market penetration is through how many people they have on their sales team. Another option is through brokers, which is the approach that Bernie Portal has taken. So essentially, we are distributed through benefit brokers across the US. And then another kind of option is online, going direct to those employers. So for example, Gusto, I've seen a lot of online advertising for them. If you go to their website, you can directly sign up. Don't have to talk to a salesperson. So that's another option as well. So really, these payroll companies have all kind of gone in different directions as far as how they're reaching employers. And it's something to keep in mind as far as like how you're hearing about payroll companies. Something else that I wanted to talk through is just why, payroll, why people are unhappy with payroll systems. It's typically the one system that you hear people grumble about. One thing that's important to note, especially at small businesses, is for most of them, it's the owner or the founder that is running payroll. Kind of secondary is somebody in HR. Most small businesses say there is room for improvement with their current payroll process. Almost, everyone we talk to has some kind of gripe about their payroll system. And this fact was surprising to me, so I included it, but 40% of small to medium-sized business owners say payroll is the worst and most time-consuming part of owning their business. Of course, there's other factors that come into play, things like support. So typically when there's an issue with payroll, especially at a small business, it's an urgent issue. And not getting that issue solved quickly can cause somebody to not get paid on time. If it's a really small employer, talent is important to them, and retaining talent and not being able to get support in a fast manner that could potentially impact employees getting paid is super important. Something else that comes into play is cost. So people not understanding the cost structure before they get into things with the payroll company, and then kind of realizing after the fact how much they're paying. Implementation, a lot of implementations for payroll fail or don't go as they expected them to go. So it's important to make sure that if you're evaluating systems that you're asking about implementation, because it is something that very often causes somebody to switch payroll companies the next year if they find that the implementation did not run smoothly or all of the features didn't get implemented as they expected. And last, business need. And when I say business need, I mean things specific to an industry. So that could be things like a restaurant needing payroll and things to tie into their POS system, or it could be an organization that has a government contract and they need specific reporting for that. So we often see people switch payroll systems too, just because there's something that they need from a compliance standpoint that they might not have in their current payroll system. Again, especially at small to medium-sized businesses, people are switching payroll companies pretty frequently. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. All right, switching gears, I'm going to talk about Ben admin software. So quickly, I wanted to just give a definition of what I mean by Ben admin software to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So I mean an employee benefits software system that HR managers and employees use to manage workplace benefits, cuts out paperwork and automates benefits eligibility, elections, and enrollment in these benefits. Something that's important to highlight here is those words HR managers and employees. So some systems, it's just HR logging in, or it's just a broker. When we're referring to a Ben admin software, we're referring here, talking about it in a way that the employee is logging in to make their election. So just wanted to make sure I defined what I was talking about before we jumped into kind of some of the complexities of that landscape. All right, history of Ben admin platforms. Like I mentioned at the beginning, there have been a ton of changes in this marketplace, even since we announced originally having this webinar. There's been several systems like Employee Navigator and Bernie Portal that have been around for quite a long time, launching in 2008. In 2012, we saw a company called Ease, which was formerly Ease Central, come about. In 2016, some of you might remember a company called Zenefits. They got a ton of venture-backed funding and gotten some trouble from a compliance perspective and kind of fell apart. 2017, there's a company called Maxwell Health that emerged. In 2018, Sun Life acquired Maxwell Health. 2022, TriNet acquired Zenefits. 2023, Employee Navigator acquired Ease. So lots of changes in this industry. And now there's only a few options left. So when it comes to Ben admin platforms, we're really seeing only two big players, Employee Navigator and Bernie Portal. The question of why this came up the other day. And I had a really kind of in-depth conversation that, number one, benefits are really complicated. And benefit administration systems are hard to build. I know here at Bernie Portal, we spent a good 10 years building our system before we even sold it externally. And they also require just a ton of industry specific knowledge. I think that's something that when you look back at here, there's some companies that are more on the technology side of things. For example, Zenefits comes to mind, that didn't have as much knowledge as far as benefits and health insurance and industry. And we saw how that impacted from a compliance perspective and just the things they were able to do. They weren't able to be successful in this industry because they didn't have that industry knowledge. So really things have kind of dwindled down as far as the benefit administration space. And there really are only a few options now. Something else to keep in mind is there really haven't been any new companies getting into this space recently. And I would just say that's because it takes a long time to build a benefit administration platform. As you've seen, it's taken Employee Navigator and Bernie Portal a long time to get the systems to the robust place that they are now. And our product roadmap would show that there's still more work to even be done. So it takes a long time to get a Ben admin system to the place where it can handle all the things that a system needs to handle. Speaking of those, I do think it's important to give a kind of a quick checklist as far as when you're looking at Ben admin platforms, what you should be looking for. First and foremost is online open enrollment. Like I mentioned at the top, employees are enrolling and electing their benefits within the system. We've heard of or run into some systems where HR is using a system to maybe track benefits for employees, but employees aren't actually doing the enrollments through the system. So something that's important is the actual enrollments. Second would be qualifying events. So when an employee's got a qualifying event, that the employee is able to elect their new benefits within that same system that they did open enrollment in. Another thing that's important is how terminations are handled. Terminations in a Ben admin system should really be the start of COBRA if that employer is large enough. So essentially an employee is terminated in the system, and then the COBRA process as far as the notices and being sent out, et cetera, is handled by the system. So something to look for in a system is that automatic process. COBRA is important to get right. A lot of small businesses are getting it wrong. So having that as part of the Ben admin system, it's just an added bonus to make sure that you're being compliant. Fourth is 1095C. So for employees or eligible employers that are required to do that, having that be a portion of your Ben admin system is great because the system knows who enrolled in what and when. Costs of those. Some systems like ourselves can generate those forms, but also can e-file and mail them, which is required for employers over 250 as well. Next, you'll want to make sure that the Ben admin platform handles the funding strategy that you have at your organization. Depending on the size of the company, this could be more complex. Some things to look for is that automating having multiple ancillary buckets, rates, just making sure that the Ben admin system can accommodate the current funding strategy that you have with your broker. And important, especially the larger an employer gets, is those carrier integrations. So making sure that that is an option and that the information is getting accurately to the insurance carriers as far as what those enrollments are. So a quick list as far as things to look for in a Ben admin system. I know we talked about some of the things that people compete on a payroll system, so I wanted to make sure that I did the same thing for benefits. Now I'm going to talk about the approaches to having a payroll and Ben admin system. So either having one or two systems, and depending on the employer, this could be a multi-system approach. So historically, payroll is the first system that HR had, like I talked about when we were talking about the history of payroll. It's been around the longest, and traditionally, that is the first system that an HR person ever used before they had any other system. Typically, they had payroll. And historically, employers have had one system for payroll and one system for benefit administration. So typically, payroll system came first, and then they needed to get a benefit administration system to enroll in benefits. And something that to highlight here is that always requires an integration. The more integrations there are, if you've ever been involved in integration, there's lots of areas where things can go wrong. Something that also is kind of like a layer of complexity that people often don't think about is just the number of logins for employees. Typically, if somebody is using a payroll and Ben admin system, it's two different logins. They're going to have to log in to get their pay stubs in one system, to enroll in their benefits in another. And depending on how many other systems that they're using for other HR things, they could have 3 or 4 logins for different things as it relates to HR and interacting with HR. And typically the more logins there are, the more questions are going to be for HR. And kind of the more people at the organization, it's kind of compounding as far as the amount of questions that are coming in, the more systems that employees using and having to manage and help employees with those logins. Typically the broker is often brought in to referee between the payroll company and the Ben admin platform. Reason being, as we found that the benefit broker provides typically the best service of anyone that you work with. They're going to answer the phone when you call, and really the payroll system is the system that needs those benefit deductions from payroll. Really, the benefit administration system doesn't need any information from the payroll system. It's kind of vice versa. And because of that benefit deduction needs, brokers getting pulled into it, HR typically trusts their broker, and the broker obviously is providing typically better service than a payroll company with a 1-800 number, for example. Another approach is all-in-one. So typically, or this could also be referred to as an HRS, that encompasses all things. So onboarding, benefits, PTO, time, payroll, and more. When I say more, that could be things like applicant tracking, performance management, compliance notices, online training. When it's an all-in-one system, there should be no integration required. If you're looking at a system and it says it's all in one, but you're needing to do integrations to connect different things, it's not actually an all-in-one system. Another kind of thing to make sure is that there's only one login for employees. If there are multiple logins for an all-in-one system, it is not all in one. So if you hear that a system has, single sign-on across different portions of it, it's not one system because there's 2 different logins. So single sign-on is going to be used when essentially 2 different systems are being used, and it's kind of being like masked to your view that you're using a single system, but it's actually 2 or even more than that. Something else to kind of note as a con on HRSs are just systems that have multiple features and don't just specifically focus on one thing. Some features might not be as robust. So one example that I can think of would be applicant tracking systems. Typically, there's dozens of software out there that only do applicant tracking. They're going to be a little bit more robust than HRS that has applicant tracking as part of the system, because that's the only thing they do. But an HRS company that's supporting onboarding, benefits, PTO, time, payroll, is having to think about product roadmaps and developing all of those different products. So they might not be as far along as far as some of the robustness, and that could be important to an organization depending on what industry they're in, as far as how important that is and if a one system approach would even work. When it comes to applicant tracking systems, for example, a recruiting firm is going to have much more robust functionality than they need than just an office that hires people once or twice a month. And in that case, they're probably just fine with an HRS. But it is important to note that depending on the organization, if they have something that's really specific to their business need and they need really robust functionality, a one system approach just might not work for them because of those needs. Payroll companies see the writing on the wall for this. And the last frontier for a lot of payroll companies is building out the benefits feature. Like I mentioned, it does take a really long time to build out benefits. It took us a long time to build the system that we have, for example. Some payroll companies are accomplishing this by purchasing Ben admin platforms and trying to integrate that into kind of their existing system or combine it with their existing system. Something else to keep in mind is a lot of payroll companies don't want the integrations with benefit administration software companies to work. I know that might be surprising, but the reason there is that they hope that you're unhappy enough with that integration that you're going to end up using their own system and potentially, make them your broker. Something that we see all the time with payroll integrations is that, if the payroll company is pointing their finger at the Ben admin platform if there's an issue and vice versa, and the Ben admin platform is kind of pointing their finger at the payroll company. It's also pretty complex because you're working with two different support teams. There's kind of a lack of accountability. And we found in talking to a lot of employers and brokers is that it's just really frustrating because you're going back and forth. Often you're playing the middleman. So lots of issues with payroll integrations with Ben admin platforms. And the reason is those payroll companies want you to use their own features. They want to be your broker if they've got that option. So they don't have a lot of incentive to make sure that those integrations work well, or to spend a lot of time or money or resources even investing in them because of that. So what's next? Obviously, there's been a ton of changes in the payroll and Ben admin platform space just in the last 6 months. And employers have to really decide if they're going to take a one system or a multi-system approach for their HR software needs. And like I mentioned, there's a ton of different factors to consider. First of all, it's going to be industry and business need. A lot of employers might have something specific to their organization that requires them to use multi-systems. We see this a lot, for example, with scheduling systems, service industry, that kind of thing. A one system approach might not be possible, depending on what a business needs. Second would be time and cost. So how much time it's going to take to implement the new system, as well as the cost of the new system. Oftentimes, and most of the time, it's more expensive to have a two-system approach because you're paying for multiple systems. We've seen employers that have 3, 4, 5 different HR systems, all that kind of overlapping features. That adds up really quickly. So it could be more, or it is usually most cost efficient to have a one system versus having to pay for multiple systems, deal with multiple support times. And then third is just support. So something that often comes up when people are switching is they mentioned that they didn't ask about support or implementation when they were going through the process. So I'd encourage everybody, when you're considering what approach you're going to take, to make sure that you're asking the questions as far as how long implementation would take, what does support look like, what is average support times, that kind of thing, because like I mentioned, especially as it relates to payroll, issues are always urgent and typically are going to be, the end in mind is getting somebody paid when they should be on time. So I encourage everybody to consider those factors. We really here at Bernie Portal see the future as an all-in-one system, but that's not going to be a system that works for everybody, depending on the industry. I do encourage you, if you're interested in learning more about Bernie Portal or an all-in-one system, to request a demo at our website. You're able to book the demo directly on there. We'd love to show you the system and see if it could be a good fit for you. That's all I had before we jump into questions.
All right, thank you. So I had a question come up as you were just talking at the end there about the multi versus the single system. And the question was really best practices. So it sounds like they have a multi-system now, but now maybe they're considering a single. So what's the best practice to switch from a multi to a single?
Yeah, good question. So we typically recommend people switch systems in the order of the employee life cycle. So starting with applicant tracking. If somebody's going to switch their applicant tracking system, it doesn't impact any of their current employees, just prospective ones. So we typically say start with applicant tracking, then start onboarding people through your new system. Then you'll go through benefits enrollment, and then PTO time, and ultimately ending with payroll, because all those other things need to happen first. So the system needs to know the benefit deductions, PTO time, all before payroll can be run. So we think of it as the employee life cycle, and making sure that implementation matches up with that.
So what is the system of record when you have an integrated system like that? Is it like, where does that data point start? Let's say they don't have maybe, well, do you have to have applicant tracking? I think that's kind of the question. Like, where does the data entry start?
Good question. Yeah. So applicant tracking, typically we're not seeing that required, but it can start there. For us, it really starts at Bernie Portal. It starts with onboarding, and that's where the information's initially being collected, which ultimately you need to run payroll. But that onboarding information also is needed for benefits and other things as well. It is important when it comes to applicant tracking, for example. A lot of people will want their applicant tracking to tie into their onboarding. So an employee or a new employee doesn't have to fill out the same information twice. If they already filled out their address on their application, for example, not having to re-enter that information for onboarding and then having to re-enter it for benefits. So if the system starts with applicant tracking, then it kind of just eliminates another point of a new hire having to fill out the same question 3 times.
And the last one, it's questions really about the challenges around getting the data to the carriers, the information to the carriers. So what do you see in the future? Like, where do you see things going with the integration with the different insurance companies?
Yeah, something that we've seen is just, unfortunately, the technology at the carriers is significantly kind of behind even some of the software that we've got in the payroll and ben admin space, as far as like what's possible on their end. Really, we see brokers and employers kind of leading the charge as far as getting those carriers to see the importance of those integrations. We found that a lot of the times the holdup on an integration isn't on what the payroll or ben admin platform can do, it's what the carrier can or willing to accommodate. So we really encourage, if an integration is important to you as far as a carrier, to be kind of advocating with those specific carriers, because that's really what we've seen move the needle as far as carriers being willing to accept integrations.
Okay, that's it. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you for all your expertise and sharing your knowledge with us. And thank you to all the UBA, the partner firm employees, and also your clients who have joined us today. Our next webinar will be on August 15th. You see here on the basics of self-funding and when to consider making the change. And that's going to be presented by Benecon. I just want to note our presenter today, Bernie Portal is a valued UBA alliance and offers UBA partner firms and their partner firms the payroll, the ben admin, and a lot of other services there. So to learn more, you want to contact your UBA partner firm who invited you to this webinar. So thanks for participating again in the UBA webinar series, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you.
Thanks.